And the baby is starving, Kirsty. Waiting and forgetting. That's the title of today's message. All right, so we're going to talk about two things today, waiting and forgetting. And I want to start with a couple questions. What's the longest time? It's still not here? Oh, well, that's why. Okay. I just bought some things from a Chinese website, so I don't know if it's going to be here. Okay. Anyone else waiting for a long time, you feel like? Okay. How do you feel when you have to wait? Who feels impatient? Okay. Who's happy anticipation when they wait? Happy anticipation when they wait. Anybody? Anytime? Happy anticipation? Okay. How about the theme of forgetting here? Who's often forgetful? Has your parents ever told you you're forgetful, you forget a lot of things, why don't you bring what you need? Because you forget it, right? What do you often forget, right? And what do you do to not forget, right? Maybe you try to put your stuff in the right place. Maybe you try to write down what you need, okay? Waiting and forgetting has to do with our faith. And today we're going to find out why. And the familiar passage today is Jesus feeding the 4,000. And remember, in these miracle stories, we see clues to who Jesus is, clues to the Israelites to who Jesus is, because they were really familiar with the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. But it's also a sample of what the new heaven and new earth will be like. These pockets of heaven, as the Bible Project would say. So let's listen to God's word together today. Mark 8, 1-10. About this time, another large crowd had gathered, and the people ran out of food again. And Jesus called his disciples and told them, I feel sorry for these people. They have been here with me for 3 days. They have nothing left to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will faint along the way, for some of them have come a long distance. And his disciples replied, how are we supposed to find enough food to feed them out here in the wilderness, Jesus? Come on. Jesus asked, how much bread do you have? 7 loaves, they replied. So Jesus told all the people to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, thanked God for them, and broken them into pieces, and he gave them to his disciples, who distributed the bread to the crowd. A few small fish were found too. So Jesus also blessed these and told the disciples to distribute them. They ate as much as they wanted. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 large baskets of leftover food. There were about 4,000 men in the crowd that day, and Jesus sent them home after they had eaten. Immediately after this, he'd gotten into a boat with his disciples and crossed over to the region of Dalmanutha. Okay, so that's God's word for us today. So Jesus here feeds the 4,000 because he felt sorry for these people. Who do you feel sorry for? Jesus here had compassion for the people here. Who do you have compassion for? Last week we talked about the imminent threat of Russia invading Ukraine, and in just in the last 7 days it's happened. And if you maybe look at news once in a while, you may have seen people trying to flee the country or stay and fight in the country for their country. I saw a picture of an old lady sitting in a tunnel because she's hiding there underground to be safe as much as possible. And there was compassion, at least a little bit, in my heart for these people. Jesus here has compassion for these people. What is compassion? Compassion, first of all, is a feeling, right? Number one, it's a feeling. It's when you feel sorry for someone. And in compassion is a feeling that comes from seeing a need. So sometimes maybe you walk around the street, or maybe you visit the city and you see someone homeless and you feel sorry for them because you see that they have a need. But notice here that compassion sees the alternative as wrong and something to be avoided, right? Jesus said here, if I send them home hungry, they will faint along the way. He's going to avoid that as much as possible. So he tells the disciples, get them something to eat. Compassion, this sorry feeling, is Jesus' attitude to this crowd who'd followed him, but it's also God's attitude towards us. God feels sorry for us because of our need that he sees. Remember in Luke 15, 4-5, if a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Will he leave the 99 in the wilderness and go search for the one that is lost until he finds it? Or Isaiah 49, 8, 9, and 10. I'm skipping verse 9 just to be brief. At just the right time, I will respond to you. On the day of salvation, I, God, will help you. They will neither hunger or thirst. The searing sun will not reach them anymore. For the Lord in his mercy will lead them, and he will lead them beside cool waters. James 5:11, we give great honor to those who endure under suffering. For instance, you know about Job, a man of great endurance. You can see how God was kind to him at the end. The Lord is full of tenderness and mercy. So we learn here that God is compassionate to us. And I just listed those verses to show you that through the Bible, God is compassionate towards us. But sometimes we think that compassion from God must mean immediate action from God on our timeline. Sometimes we think compassion must mean immediate action from God on our timeline. And sometimes we get really frustrated that God doesn't work on our timeline. Maybe you've prayed before and you felt like, God, I'm going to ask you for help. And then you wait half an hour, or you wait a day, or you wait 3 days, and nothing extraordinary happens. And you feel like God didn't answer that prayer, or you feel like God has rejected that prayer. That's us waiting for God's compassion only on our timeline. Did you notice that in the passages I just read from Luke, Isaiah, and James, there was always a time aspect in it? When one sheep is lost, the shepherd goes out to find the sheep. From the sheep's point of view, it's lost for as long as that shepherd is looking for that sheep. There's a time there. Isaiah 49, it says, at the right time, I will respond to you. James 5:11 talks about Job, but Job was a man of great endurance. And if you read the book of Job, he suffered a lot before the Lord was kind to him at the end. In the familiar Bible stories that you guys know, Joseph suffered many years in prison in Egypt for something he didn't do, right? He was wrongly accused, but he suffered for many years before God's time to raise him, to be the second in power in Egypt, to do the work of saving food for the 7 years of famine ahead. Moses wanted to help his fellow people. He killed someone early in age, but in 40 years, he was the simple shepherd in Midian before God called on him again. Isaiah 30:18, yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you. Therefore, he will rise up to show you compassion. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are those who wait for him. So often we think if God is compassionate to us, then God needs to respond immediately to my need. And if I don't hear back from him within 3 minutes, God's not listening. That's not the case biblically. God's compassion is often tied in with us having to wait. Compassion is God's attitude towards us, but waiting for him means that we trust in his compassion. And sometimes we have to wait for his compassion to refresh and renew us. Let's look at that crowd again. The crowd here persevered with Jesus for 3 days. They followed Jesus for 3 days, listening to his teaching, following him in the wilderness. And the simple question is, what have you done for 3 days straight? And the question is, nothing. And the answer is nothing. Our activities, our life is stacked with activities where we're switching from this to that and this to that, right? You've done nothing for 3 days straight. But this crowd here persevered with Jesus for 3 days. Often we see the miracles and think, hey, why does Jesus respond so quick? But we miss the details about them actually waiting and really having this faith in God. Right? And I bet here there was a greater crowd than just the 4,000. I bet after the first day, some people were like, I'm hungry. I'm going to go get some food. And they walked away from Jesus' teaching. Maybe on the second day, some of them were like, oh, I got to go finish this, Jesus. I'm going to go right now, going home. Bye! Right? And they run off. But it's these 4,000 who have continued to follow Jesus for 3 days in the wilderness. And the wilderness here doesn't mean they're like glamping in the woods, right? They're literally in the desert, walking around. But now is the right time where Jesus has compassion on these people and he's going to feed them. So waiting is also a part of this story. And waiting is an expression of our faith in him. So God is compassionate to us. But if we have not received his refreshment yet, there are two things we need to consider. The first is it the right time? And do you have faith to wait for the right time? Right? That's the first thing we need to consider. Perhaps it's not the right time yet. And so we wait in faith. If you really believe that something is the solution, then time and waiting actually goes by really quickly. Right? Have you ever spent time with a friend for like hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and you're like, oh, that only felt like 10 minutes. But then you're sitting here and you're like, this is only 30 minutes, but it feels like hours and hours and hours and hours, right? Why is there a difference? Because you love that friend. You like spending that time with your friend. Right? Remember the story of Jacob when he was working for Laban, for Rachel, his wife? He worked 7 years and it felt like nothing to him because he felt like that this woman was the solution, the thing that he really wanted in life. Right? And so when we wait for God, when we really trust that God is the solution, that God is the answer, that waiting actually turns joyful. But if you're only waiting for God because you want God to give you the other solution you want, that waiting is going to be miserable. And you have to make that clear in your heart and in your mind. Two things we need to consider if you feel like God has not answered any of your prayers for compassion. Is it the right time? And often, God's answer to us is no. But in the gospel stories, we can also hear that we can facilitate the right time for God to touch us in our life through humility and desperation, right? Just a few weeks ago, we looked at the Syrophoenician woman, right? Jesus was kind of rude to her. He threw some sass at her. He's like, dogs and children, bread under the table, right? Remember that? But this Syrophoenician woman, she said, but dogs will eat what the children have dropped from the table, or my paraphrase of the Bible is that, right? And then Jesus answers her faith with the healing of her daughter. What do we see there? We see someone instituting the right time because they truly are expressing their need and their desperation for Christ. They know that Jesus is the answer, not anything else. Right? Remember the story of the 4 friends who brings a lame friend through the roof to see Jesus? And Jesus says there's great faith here because of these 4 friends really trusting that Jesus is the answer for this man's illness, his lameness. It was the right time because of their desperate dependence on Christ. If you feel like God has not answered prayers, if God has not been compassionate to you, first thing to consider, is it the right time? And often it's not. We have to wait. But the second thing to consider is, maybe I'm not humble and desperate enough, and I just want a quick and easy way out of this. Again, if Christ is what we want, we will happily wait for him to show up. So the question we must have in our hearts right now is, do you only come to God in hopes for something else, for another desired result? Right? The stereotype is, dear God, please give me a good grade. Right? Is that our attitude when we come to God? If that's the case, you will never be satisfied, because you're not actually looking to Christ as the solution for why you need that good grade, but you're looking to Christ as an idol, as a genie, and that's not how God works. And God is real, and he's not going to answer that prayer. John 6:26, Jesus actually talks about this. He says to them, you're looking for me because you ate loaves and had your fill. So in his day, there were people who were just like following Jesus around. They were like, all right, when's the food coming? When's going to be the big basket full of bread? Maybe I'm going to sneak a few loaves, put it in my cloak, and leave, because, the disciples are collecting so many basketfuls anyways, right? But that's not faith. Again, that's idolatry. If we come to God just to meet our specific requests, you don't have that relationship with God. God's not going to answer that prayer. We do come to God with a need. We have to come to God recognizing our need. But our need is not for our request to be met first and foremost. Our need is for God. Will you follow God whether or not that request you have is denied or given to you? Let's look at the disciples here. Jesus wanted to feed the crowd because he had compassion, but here's his disciples' reply. How are we supposed to find enough food to feed them out here in the wilderness? That's what they said. Just a few weeks ago, they saw Jesus feed the 5,000, and it feels like they totally forgot about it here, right? Their reply is totally without faith. Why? Because they're looking at the physical situation. They're in the middle of nowhere. There's no McDonald's, right? There's no Chipotle. It's like, where can we find food? And Jesus asks about what they have. There's 7 loaves and a few fish. And Jesus again feeds everyone. And you might think, are the disciples slow? Are they thick in their head? Are they stupid? How could they forget? But friends, we do the same thing. We forget the ways that God has shown grace to us all the time. In my life, every little big trouble I meet, I feel like, that's my first reaction. And earlier in my Christian walk, it was like, where are you, God? Why could you make this go wrong? Why did you make this go wrong? Right? But when we really think about it, we've had those, what are we going to do? God, come on, experiences before. And you're only here today because God has led you through those experiences. But when you have another crisis come up, it feels totally brand new. You feel like, I don't know what to do, God. How can we feed? There's no McDonald's, right? Each crisis to us feels brand new because we forgot what God has done in our life in the past. If this week you're worried about another test or another exam or another project, think about maybe you were in 7th grade and worried about the same thing. Has God led you through that? Did you graduate from 7th grade? Did it work? Has it helped? Not every crisis we meet is brand new. But we forget about how God has given us grace before. So what can we do to not be stupid disciples like these disciples here? And we don't want to be like them, right? We can trust that God will help you through this new crisis in your life. Don't think it was just coincidence that after you prayed, it worked out a little bit better than you expected. Don't think you were just lucky, right? Don't think you just you deserve all the credit for that past time that God has helped you. Trust that God has helped you and will help you. And this is the way our faith grows. This is the way our faith grows. Trust that God is helping you step by step. God's helped you in the past, and He's going to continue to guide you through this current crisis. And in the Old Testament, there's a word called Ebenezer. Who's heard that word in a song before? Ebenezer. All right, we're going to sing that song next week. And it's from 1 Samuel 7:12, where the Israelites, they raised stones, right, as physical reminders of the way that God has helped in their past. And that's what we need to do in our life. We need to erect little reminders for us about how God has helped in our life. So that when we face that new crisis, we can look to the past and be confident that God will help again. One way to do this is to journal or diary your spiritual life. Journal or diary your prayers. And then flip back every once in a while. And when I do that, personally, I feel like, oh, I didn't realize it, but that prayer has been answered, and this prayer has been answered, and that's not a concern of mine anymore. So God does help in all of these ways, where we're so future focused that we often just forget about it. And I like this picture of a rock. I don't know how to say the word. C-A-I-R-N. It's a trail marker. Have you ever been hiking and people put little rocks on top of each other? Yeah, that's what it is. A cairn or cairn. What is that? Jerry, what is that? You go hiking a lot. Okay, it's rocks. Okay? And I like this picture because it's the picture of a humanoid, right? And that's what needs to happen in our spiritual life. That little bit by little bit, how you interpret the future is built from how God has helped you in the past. This is what gives you strength. This is what gives you peace through that crisis you may be facing. Become a person with stored up faith to trust that God's got your back. Don't be like the stupid disciples who forgot what happened just a few weeks ago. So waiting and forgetting is crucial to our faith. If you just forget about how God has helped you, you will not ever have faith. But if you keep remembering and if you keep waiting, your faith will grow. And yesterday when I was driving home, a perfect illustration showed up, so I had to share it. I was babysitting yesterday. Kirsty came here for worship practice, and I took Asher and Evelyn away from the babysitting place. And the next babysitter brought donuts, and Asher saw donuts, and his eyes lit up. And he walked up to the grandma, and he's like, "May I have a donut, please?" And of course, he got a donut, right? And put it in a baggie. And I said, when we get home, you can eat the donut. I didn't want him eating chocolate donuts in the car because, it's going to be chocolate everywhere. And he said in the car, 我不相信你，你不会给我的。I don't believe you, Dad. You won't give it to me, right? While this sermon is brewing in my head. So I said to him, if you don't believe me, you will have no donut. You will have no donut. And so I had a 15-minute conversation because if you know, he's pretty stubborn. In the beginning, he was like, nope, I still don't believe you. And, 10 minutes into this 15-minute conversation, car ride conversation. As we get closer to home, he finally starts getting it. I keep explaining to him, it's when we believe, right, where there's results. And at the end, when we got to the garage, our home, I was like, do you believe that I will give you this donut when we get home? And he said, yeah, okay, I believe you now. And at home, I cut up the donut so he could eat it with a fork so it wouldn't get all over his face. And he ate the donut, right? But often we're like Asher, including myself, with God. As long as we don't see an immediate result, we think, you're not giving it to me, God. But God is asking us to wait in faith. And the song we just sang, Waymaker, and the song we just sang about